Thank you all for joining us. I am Theo Peridis. I'm a professor of strategy at the Schulich School of Business. Have been spearheading our effort in Hyderabad for the last 3 years. Our panelists are friends of the school, but very importantly, they are very senior members of the business, legal, regulatory environment in India. I will introduce each one in turn. For those of you that you were also part of our webinar on Tuesday, you know that a lot of the discussion then was about financials, the economic implications of the crisis in around the world, and critically, of course, about India. So no better person to continue this discussion than our good friend Gunit Chandra. Gunit is a banker by profession, has been with a number of banks throughout his careers, and if I pick up, Citigroup, that it's familiar to everybody around the world, but other banks like IDBI and IBI. But more recently, Gunit was the chief executive officer of Deutsche Bank in Asia Pacific and managing director and chief executive officer of Deutsche Bank India. Gunit has an extensive career in finance, and recently what he did is, with a couple of his partners, established the APAC Financial Services Group, which is a platform that is trying to move lending and financial services to small and medium-sized firms, and which everybody who is involved in India and in the economy of India recognize how critical it is to the growth of India and to the future. So I would like first to ask Gunit to share some of his perspectives and link our discussion and continue our discussion about the implications of the economic crisis in India, in the economy in India, and with an eye on the small, medium-sized firms.
Okay, thanks, Theo, and thanks to the Schulich School, and thanks, Ron, too. Without getting it too scripted, I just thought, let's look at leadership from various constituencies in the country. So the government leadership, society leadership, business leadership, and ultimately every individual's leadership. So let's start with the government, what I feel at this point of time. I think with anytime you analyze actions and expectations from any of the constituencies, you have to put a difficulty factor to it. So when India plays test cricket in India, the difficulty factor is much lower. When it plays overseas in Australia, South Africa, England, you can see the difficulty factor goes up several notches. And it's no different in India. 1.3 billion people, democracy, low income levels, social infrastructure, which is challenged at the best of times. I have to say that when I look at the leadership which the government has taken on this, I'm extremely impressed. They have very clearly put society above business. I should think there should be no argument around that. These are not my words, actually. I think Anu Aga had said this in one of her talks. But I completely agree with the fact that they put society above business. I also think that they have shown great statesmanship in putting global over local. While every country tries to seal its borders, let's remember that there is a life after COVID, right? And you don't burn your bridges. In fact, I think what the government has done is cemented many of the bridges by making sure that while the local is protected, they also contribute towards the cause globally. And absolutely triple tick to the government on that. I'm actually also very pleasantly, I wouldn't say surprised, but it's been good that there's been pretty seamless between the center and the state and the district. It's not got into a political rhetoric, exceptions apart. I think all the parties have done well. And it seems that there is a, as smooth as can be, flow between the center and the state and the district. And I think that's good news for the longer term as well. The one place where I think many would probably join me and say that the economic support, the economic package has not yet arrived. And I hope it's the India equivalent of US TARP. I hope it's timely. And I really think that's the next big thing. And we can go into what needs to get done on that economic package. And we can come back to that point. So that's the one which is awaited, but I have to say, very impressive in terms of a very high difficulty factor, how they put people and they put lives ahead of livelihood, and global and local coming together very, very nicely. Let's move a bit to society. We'll come back to the business part of it. We'll come back to what the government should do, in my view, on the economic package. But let's come to society. You know, to me, how the society has responded in India is like a bit like a general who's gone to war. When the general goes to war and the command is shoot, you can't have the soldiers debating whether it's a good idea to shoot or not to shoot. Chances are you'll get shot. Let's remember that no one has more data than the government. 1.3 billion people, all of us can have views of our own. All of us may have different views, but none of us have the data which the government has, which the PMO has. And once the government has made its decisions, and lockdowns are not easy decisions, and to extend lockdowns twice over is even of a higher difficulty factor. I think a big praise to society for having followed the government. And this has been most impressive, at least I would say 99% of the time. And frankly, big marks to all the 1.3 million people of the society on this. It's been inspirational. And the second part of society I must give a high five to is really the Corona warriors, right? Whether it's the doctors, whether it's the police, whether it's the party workers, whether it's the social workers, NGOs, defense. Think about it, if you were up on the streets every single day attending to the affected, how difficult that would be relative to many of us actually sitting in our homes and doing wonderful webinars. So a big kudos to society. And I think on both the government level and the society level, at least speaking for myself, I'm very impressed with the leadership they've shown. I'm very impressed with the humanity which they've shown. And I'm very impressed that India has stayed together on the response to this unfortunate crisis. Let me go back to what the government, in my view, should do in terms of the economic package. I think from a financial world standpoint, the regulator, the Reserve Bank of India, has been very responsive to market participants. They have injected lots of liquidity into the markets, even though that's still sitting within banks rather than being transmitted into companies. I think the Reserve Bank of India has brought about a lot of stability, because volatilities are always going to be high today and tomorrow, as long as we have this uncertainty, unpredictability of the virus. So between responsiveness, between liquidity, between stability, I think the Reserve Bank of India has done, frankly, even ahead of what the markets expected. What could Reserve Bank do? I certainly think moratorium should move on beyond 3 months, because cash flows haven't come back into the companies. I also think that they should allow a one-time restructuring to the financial system, because it's no point expecting cash flows coming from corporate borrowers or MSME borrowers or individual borrowers if, frankly, their own cycle hasn't started. So I think some amount of forbearance will be needed, and it should be in the order of the day, even while it may not be exactly as per the letter of the law in terms of how RBI has in the recent past regulated and very well the banking system. I also think the government needs to put out an MSME package to the micro, small, medium enterprises. And the reason I say that is not just because APAC financial self-interest, and I put that bias right up front, but I think that they are very large employment contributors. They provide the supply chain to the large corporates. They contribute a lot to GDP, to jobs. And I think the government needs very clearly a package which is going to come for the MSMEs. I think the government needs to put out packages for the affected sectors, whether it's hospitality, whether it's millions of Kirana stores who haven't been open for the last 40 days, right? The government could actually do these packages in many ways, whether it's deferred taxation, whether it's providing direct credit guarantees to the banks and NBFCs who lend to these sectors, whether it's in terms of subvention to lower interest rates, whether it's in terms of direct cash transfers in some way, at least to the poor. I think the government has to now put out the India bazooka, the India top, and it's needed now, and it's needed in size here. The government has been very measured on this. They have the data, but I would think that this is probably likely sooner than later. As far as the business is concerned, which is the third end of leadership, having spoken about the government and society, I just looked at business leadership in sort of 3 or 4 different ways here. One, once we are beyond the COVID pandemic, I think businesses, I think entrepreneurs, I think people like Nader and others can show us the way, as they have done historically, on is the focus of business going to be balanced between social leadership and economic leadership, or is it going to move totally to economic with disregard for social leadership? Let me give an example. I think the corporate of tomorrow, the business of tomorrow, has to be more respectful of their social leadership on impacting the environment, on fairness with customers, on compliance with regulators, rather than move into habits which had been developed over time, right? Where the focus only is on shareholders, lenders, vendors, employees. So I think that balance is extremely important as we step beyond the pandemic. Another aspect of business leadership, which I'm actually struggling with, is, as they say, never waste a crisis. Now, the question is, if you have a business group, let's take APAC Financial, we're sitting long equity, we're sitting long cash. Do we store it for the future? It's uncertain future, it's unpredictable future. We don't know whether COVID clears itself in 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, 24 months. So do we store the cash? Do we make strategic buys at 1/4 of the price? Or do we merge? I think every single company, and even most of the startup companies, are going to have to ask these questions, and leadership will be tested. And my management team and leadership team and myself too, in the same breath. The third part of business that I just thought I'll touch on, since many of the youngsters and students like to think about startups, is life just got tougher for startups. I'm not talking about the company which I work for, but life in general has got difficult for startups. I think promoters and existing equity investors will have to pump in more money into the companies if they expect that new external shareholders are going to be found. Frankly, new shareholders are going to sit back at least for the next 3 to 6 months till they see a definite timeline to the crisis. Talent in startups must understand that they have to now balance risk with rewards. They have to balance fixed salaries versus variables. They join startups for the reward. I think the promoters have to be cognizant of that, share more rewards with the teams, but also teams have to be willing to take cuts. I think that's important, especially if you want to conserve cash. And finally, I just think that profitability must be an imperative ahead of just building scale and growth right now. If you're profitable, you will survive. If you survive, there's a great chance you will thrive, since many will not. So stay profitable to the extent you best can. Control the controllables. Worry less about the exogenous variables. But think, am I really adding value to my customer? Am I differentiating in my product? Because that will get tested now. You just cannot be yet another provider of a good or service which the customer may or may not really want. I'll stop there. I haven't addressed from an individual, but I want to come back to then when it's a more interactive session with students as to how individuals, how students, how young professionals can show leadership as much as the government has done and is expected to do, as much as society has brilliantly done in India. And I think companies are deliberating on these tough questions for today and tomorrow. I'll stop there here, but I'd love to hear what Berra and Nader have to say.
Thank you, Gunit. Great, excellent. Thank you. A nice bridge to our next panelist, and as none other by a great friend of the school, Mr. Nader Godrej. Mr. Godrej is probably known to everybody in India because he is the managing director of the Godrej Industries. What probably people not necessarily know is his passion for the environment, his passion for businesses to be doing good, and how he has spearheaded and he has driven the Godrej Industries into these directions in the about 35 years that he has been at the helm. Mr. Godrej is the managing director of Godrej Industries. He is the chairman of Godrej Agrovet. He is also very active in the social and community world in India. He's the president of Alliance Française. He has received many awards about his work and contribution at many aspects of society in India. Will emphasize probably the Lifetime Achievement Award in the the chemistry, in the Porter Prize Award on creating shared value, and on and on and on. I mean, it's amazing how many organizations have recognized the great work that he has done. He has a master's in science from Stanford University, and of course an MBA from another great school besides Schulich, which is the Harvard Business School. But he has spent the last few years working with us and giving us insights into how the Schulich School of Business will be a great contributor to management education in India. One thing that I'm sure very few people know is that Nadir Godrej is also a poet. And I think I will leave it at that for Nadir to share with us his thoughts.
Thank you very much, Theo. It's a pleasure to be here with Guneet and Berra. And thanks to Rontu as well for organizing this. The coronavirus strikes us all. We don't know who is next to fall. When will this war be finally won? While lockdowns help, they are no fun. Now every policymaker strives to balance livelihoods and lives. No livelihoods is such a cost, but once any life is lost, nothing at all can bring it back. So let's keep lockdowns right on track. No livelihood could mean starvation, but there's a solution for every nation. Direct to home food supply, a generous UBI is then the way we can go. These measures can soften the blow. The fiscal prudes are bound to blush. But this is the time for the rest to rush to gains, and even further still, this is the time to show some will. Helicopter money can succeed in serving all that are in need. Lockdowns can't be a permanent trend, for at some stage they'll have to end. South Korea and Taiwan showed the way. Large-scale testing saved the day. Germany also laid its trust in massive testing, which is a must. Antibody tests are on the way. They could help to save the day. Many more could be infected. This hypothesis should be inspected. New York seems to think that's so. Californian surveys also show asymptomatic cases could be high. There is a need to verify. In every area of the world, good surveys should be unfurled. Now, antibodies could protect, but we still need to detect whether the protection is weak or strong, and whether it lasts for very long, or whether it works for every strain. If we know the answers, we can gain from surveys that are widely spread. They will point the way ahead. If antibodies do protect, then we should also expect convalescent plasma therapy to be the panacea some can see. It's already being tried, and soon it will be verified. If it fails, we'll need a cure, and that will take more time for sure. But if many people are immune, we can open up quite soon. The vulnerable should isolate. The rest can start to pull their weight. The immune should be allowed to roam, but many still could work from home. And if we take a stance that's wise, the economy will slowly rise. Reforms are now the need of the hour, and let us hope that those in power get the message straight and true. We need to build the economy anew. There is a need in every nation to recover from Corona's depredation. But progress we also need to see in climate change and inequality. I have some thoughts on what's the way. I'll save them for another day. And what should business leaders do to both survive and then renew their organizations under threat? What is the course that they should set? Compassion comes first to mind. Timely solutions they must find to the social problems all around. Clever solutions should be found to leverage both funds and skills. First, use your brains, then pay the bills. In India, thanks to CSR, business can go very far in weighing all the pros and cons and coordinating a response. And when production can resume, the priority we must assume is safety and security. For all, but most importantly, the vulnerable we must shield, do not to temptation yield. The crisis is indeed a pain, but there is so much to gain. At first, any major change will appear to be both strange, but then we can begin to see a striking opportunity. While all of us are badly burnt, indeed, there's much that we have learned. Work from home is now a breeze, and we can now gain a release from travel bills and office rent. Indeed, this time can be spent to reimagine and reinvent a better world, a broader tent. Surely we can aspire to both sustainability as well as growth. At first, survival must be prized, so cash must be prioritized. And when we are past survival fear, we can start to re-engineer. No good crisis should go to waste. All of us should now make haste to completely redesign our world. A new vision should be unfurled. Our gaping wounds we should suture for a happy, healthy future. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think our audience will like though to hear, besides the great poem that is very timely and covers a number of areas, your insights and the way you see Godred's Industries, how part of it, I know you're very, very fond of the agribusiness of what you do. And I'm sure people will like to hear a lot of that. Actually, we already have a number of questions about farming and farmers. So people will like to hear very much that, Nadir. Thank you.
One of the things the group is doing is we have a corona response. We are spending 50 crores on all kinds of corona relief. Employees have also contributed, and we have provided matching funds to employee contributions, which we have given to the Prime Minister's Relief Fund. We are also providing lots of sterilizer and soap products that we manufacture free of charge, both to government institutions which are distributing this, as well as we are working very closely with all the NGOs that we normally do CSR work with for a special COVID response. And the governments have also asked us to continue our anti-malarial effects, because malaria season is going to start soon. And along with all the disruptions of COVID, we have to be prepared to prevent malaria and dengue as well. On the agribusiness side, we are very fortunate that agribusiness is a priority industry. So many of our factories are actually working. Many workers are staying on the factory campus. We are using our offices to house the workers. We are providing the workers with food. We are very careful protocols for sterilization, wearing masks, social distancing in the factories. Fortunately, it's easier to do all of this in process industries rather than in assembly industries. So that is what we are doing in agribusiness. And we actually think that farmers are better off because COVID has not spread to rural areas in India, and they're getting a lot of support from the government and industry.
Excellent, thank you. Let me turn to our third panelist, a great friend of the school, Baran Vakil. Baran Vakil is one of the best known lawyers in India, best known corporate lawyers in India, is probably one of the top 3 in project finance in India, recognized in law societies, recognized around the world in the work he has done as a project finance lawyer, and one of the people that have put some of the biggest power generation business projects in India. He was the founding partner of one of the largest law firms in Mumbai, the ACB and Partners. And he has been very active across the board, both of the legal environment, helping the government with the regulatory frameworks, and helping a number of corporations navigate through many crises, and of course, the latest crisis we're all faced. Baran has an LLM from Columbia University, and he is certified both in India and in New York State to operate. But very importantly for us, 2 things. Number one, he is a great friend of the school from the very beginning and has helped us establish ourselves and has helped us guide ourselves to make the contribution the school makes in India, and also has been working diligently with us to make sure that what we do is always with an eye on helping future managers in India. Baran, what we would like to hear is not just the legal side of things, but very importantly, the regulatory issues and how businesses have to address those in the new crisis.
Thanks a lot, Theo. Thanks a lot, Rontu, and thank you for all of those who have joined, especially those joining early morning from Canada. From a government perspective, I think what worries me, and I speak from a global point of view, not just an Indian point of view, that this is like in any emergency, there is a tendency to minimize democracy and, if you will, maximize autocracy, because in some ways, justifiably, governments feel that the control has to be centralized at times like this. And the other caveat I'd like to put, especially as a lawyer, is that privacy issues, which I'm sure all of you are reading about, because all these tracking apps, whether it's across Europe, UK is particularly grappling with it right now because they're not using the Apple, Google combined one. There was a lot of writings in our papers today about the one that India has created and the privacy issues there. So there's a very, very delicate balance because, of course, I think both as Nadir said in his poem and Gunit has said, we have some learnings from the successful countries, if I may call them that, especially Korea, where you have to do testing and tracing. And therefore, this tracing part is done through the app. And so therefore, the dichotomy between privacy and getting the database right so that the health hazard can be minimized. So that's from a government perspective. I think those two are crucial concerns for me personally, because unfortunately, you know, those of you in Canada, you are at great privilege, probably one of the very few countries in the world today where you have democracy and sanity. I wouldn't say that across your border. And, you know, New Zealand, of course, is another country that has stood out. But otherwise, in so many countries across the globe, there is anyway a tendency to autocracy, and therefore my fear. Then coming down a bit into, you know, Gunit's area of expertise, I think I completely agree with him that where India has been extremely fortunate so far is we pretty much started as early as you can. If I remember right, we had about 600 cases. And to say that we could have started before that, I think is pretty hypothetical, and hindsight is 2020. 600 cases as in a country of 1.3 billion that's very early indeed. And I think that has certainly helped us, given us a lot of time, and of course the learnings from the countries that suffered a lot before us. So timing was terrific. The second thing I think which was done very well, and again, as Gunit says, a country of our size and with our rural population, the awareness, even in a city like Bombay, those of you who live in Bombay, and I'm sure it was in other cities too, the campaign across the city within 48 hours, I mean, there were thousands of banners, talking about what protection you should take, the health concerns. And this was, I'm involved, very fortunate to be involved with a lot of microfinance companies. And I know, therefore, that right across India, the awareness was done very swiftly and very effectively, to the stage where just now there is a massive fear, especially in rural India. So those things were done very well. I think he has been extremely generous in saying that we are waiting for a timely financial package. Again, in comparison, yes, it's a very complicated time, and we certainly don't have the fiscal room that a lot of other countries enjoy. But I think timely has come and gone, because I'm sure all of you have read the very unfortunate articles and may have seen also on TV that there has already been way too much suffering. So I think across the world there are about 1.2 billion daily wage earners, and a huge part of those are in India, as you would expect. I think it would be about 20% of that figure. And we know that at least 150 million just in India alone have been stranded, are in a very, very difficult situation, couldn't get home, having a very tough time naturally if you're a daily wage earner and you do not have the income just goes to zero and there is no government support. It's a very, very difficult situation. And 6 weeks, with all due respect, is way too long. And so I know that they are working night and day. There's no lack of effort. The work ethic is fantastic, but I really hope that we are promised, on a weekly basis, and I hope it comes super fast. I also think, again, this is not my area of expertise, but I think it's not that complicated. And amongst the best economists in the world, I'm referring to the article by Raghuram Rajan, Amartya Sen, and the latest Nobel winner, Dr. Banerjee, which said that you have to start with the poorest. You have to start at the bottom of the pyramid. And there you can't be miserly. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a big proponent of modern monetary theory, which again, Nadir alluded to. But as he said, you cannot be stingy with the poor. So there you have to do, again, our government, many of you may know, we ran one of the most amazing and sophisticated biometric programs, going from zero. We had no ID cards in India, and we went, we've covered almost the entire population in a remarkably short period of time. I mean, faster than China, US, anyone. So you have that. We had a program for, 40% of adult Indians didn't have a bank account. So we had a banking, what we call the Jan Dhan program. So we have that too. So we have the technology to do direct benefit transfers. And there's no big debate on that, surely, to say that whatever amount needs to be sent to them, it's minimal amounts. We're talking, 5,000 rupees. That money has to be sent swiftly. And the second one, again, Gunit said, I'm aware of time, so I'll go a bit faster, is the micro and small medium enterprises, the MSMEs. So start on those two immediately. Our liquidity, the Reserve Bank of India, Central Bank, has been super prompt. There's no question about that. They've ensured the liquidity is as high as it has ever been. But the issue is banks today justifiably are extremely risk averse. And the only use they've done of that liquidity, in the last round, they didn't even use it. More than half of the liquidity just the bank. But where they use it are the best credits, the best companies in India. Those are not the guys who are suffering. As we all know, it's the smaller guys who are suffering. And therefore, again, I don't think it's such a, so much brain damage. You have to do a credit enhancement. Or if you want to do like most of the developed economies have done and done straight government guarantees, fantastic. And I have a question. I don't know whether I'm allowed to ask questions, but I would like to ask Nadir and Gunit that there's a lot of talk now that as it is, God knows we have enough debt. Across advanced economies, it's over 100%. In Italy and Japan, it's 200% of GDP. So we've got that whole legacy coming. But just now, maybe we should do, and Gunit mentioned TAP, maybe we should do equity rather than debt. So that's my question to them, that should we be looking more at equity than debt, both in Startup India and in the SME segment, but do guarantees and you got to do it fast. So that's what I had to say on that. And then I move back to my, the regulatory space. I think on the regulatory space, it's been, things have moved pretty fast. The issues are very, very difficult, as you can imagine. And a moratorium was done immediately. Again, I think if I remember right, on the 27th of March for 3 months. I think the Reserve Central Bank itself knows that 3 months is just buying time. They will have to push it out for another 3 months at a time. But what I'm happy to tell Gunit is that they are thinking exactly like him, and they're going to look at a one-time restructuring. The moral dilemma, and it's a very justifiable dilemma, again, with due respect, I think America has kind of missed it on that, is that you have to set this up and allow the restructuring to those who have suffered through COVID. You cannot allow people who have been defaulters prior to COVID to benefit from this restructuring, because as it is, your resources are very limited. And we don't want zombies, people who have been defaulting for the last 3 years to be walking zombies for another 3-4 years and then default. So I think that's what they are grappling with. I think they are very close to coming to terms with that. And therefore, a one-time restructuring is certainly on the cards. There are also a lot of complex legal issues, which I'm sure all of you know. The force majeure, frustration of contracts, rental payments, salaries. Again, our government took a very strong stand, which I think is very good. I'm sure it's tough for the corporate world, but basically they said you should not cut salaries, you should not retrench people, because you have deeper pockets than them, and therefore you have to take a humanitarian view of this. And the last one I'll leave it at is that the courts have been super proactive. The courts are just now hearing only emergency cases, but the courts, we used to say they're courts of law, they're courts of equity, and now we have courts of sympathy, where they have been, even though force majeure was not applicable, even though the moratorium was not applicable to bondholders, the courts have gone in and said that in these circumstances, you have to be sympathetic and you have to allow them to not pay, at least for suspend their payments or delay their payments for some time. Of course, it's difficult to do this, and courts are not the right place, because then the chain reaction is bad, and therefore some of our funds have got into trouble. But I'll leave it at there, and thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Berra. Very, very good. Very different perspective, but also complementary. And you couldn't help yourself. You touched on the finance, you touched on the liquidity, you touched on everything. And we very much appreciate it. And this is speaking of who you are and how engaged you are from the legal profession to the business world. We have many questions. The most important question that got the most hits was, as you can expect, whether the poem that Nadir read to us will be available. And yes, indeed, it will be available on the Schulich website afterwards. But of course, you have to give full credit to the author whenever you repeat it or you take pieces of it. Thank you, Nadir, for making it available to all the attendees.
You're most welcome.
Gunit, a number of people said, how do you address the liquidity issues that exist in small, medium-sized business, in the banking sector, and in the government in the midst of this crisis?
So, as Berra said, there is enough liquidity which is available with banks, but it is parked back into Reserve Bank of India, or is getting into the large corporates. So I think if we have to provide liquidity into the MSME world, or to the small borrowers, or to the low-income people, I just think there has to be some form of credit protection or direct guarantees from the government to complement what lenders are doing. Because otherwise, frankly, that liquidity will not reach the destination. And if it does not reach the destination, it's not going to resolve the business and the economic and the job loss issues. I will also say that things like the moratorium, for instance, or a one-time restructuring, what they do is only help to mitigate the cash outflow risk, right? That those companies have to service their loans, and so we are giving them an opportunity to lower their cash outflows. But how is cash inflows going to happen? The only way cash inflows will happen is if, frankly, if there's more government spending, if there's more direct benefit transfer, and the government must look very sharply at the cash inflows while the regulator has looked at the cash outflows. And again, I agree with Berra. We better get the capital allocation right this time, right? Every single company, every individual, and even the government has to get the capital allocation. Is it going to put that capital allocation into consumption? Is it going to put that into investment? Is it going to put it onto the near term? Is it going to put it into the structural long term? No easy answer, scarce resources, but fire the top, fire the bazooka. I think we need it now. I don't think we should not do it only because the rating agencies will have an issue with what could be the outcome. So I'll stop there, but please focus on cash inflows of MSMEs and low-income group borrowers besides the cash outflows.
I would like to say something both on what Gunit said and also the question that Berra asked. First, on Gunit's point, I entirely agree that some kind of guarantee is necessary to get the flows to medium and small scale sector. But there is one other possibility. Since the medium and small scale sector is often part of an integrated supply chain, which involves the large scale sector, it is possible for the medium and small scale units to get in touch with the large scale customers and get some kind of supplier credit, vendor credit. It's easy for the large scale to support lending to the small scale when they're the direct beneficiaries of the products. And to Berram's question about should we worry about the lack of fiscal space, I feel that in times of emergency, we shouldn't worry about that. I agree with Gunit. We shouldn't worry about the rating agencies. Countries all over the world are doing extraordinary things at this time. We should, of course, have very good relationships with the rating agencies, explain to them what we are doing. Although India's budget deficit, both state and center combined is very high, India's debt to GDP is very low. It's only about 70%. Many countries are now reaching 200%. Also, the Indian government has huge assets, lands, listed companies, unlisted companies. LIC was supposed to have a public issue. We don't know what it is worth, but it could be worth a lot. The government of India should treat this as an emergency and spend. The spending, on the face of it, it looks like it'll make the budget deficit worse, but it might actually make it better. A UBI, I think, will not in the end cost the government anything because a universal basic income is spent. there is a multiplier effect. India's tax to GDP is 15%. So if you assume a multiplier effect of 7, it comes back to the government intact. It may not be a multiplier of 7, but a lot of it will come back. And a UBI could later be financed by cutting wasteful subsidies. A UBI is much more efficient than subsidies.
Liquidity is a serious issue for the SMEs, and I don't see any other solution other than some kind of government guarantee program or a credit enhancement. So that has to happen. So the two critical issues, as we've all three said, is the direct transfers to the poor and this credit enhancement or credit guarantee to the micro and small medium enterprises.
Look at those corona warriors. Look at the doctors who are actually working in hospitals, clinics, etc., for all the patients. Can they get an income tax waiver for this entire year? Let's put our money where the mouth is. They will be needed for the next 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months. That's a very small check for the government, but I think we need to demonstrate compassion, as Nader said, for people who are actually helping us save our lives.
Thank you. No, and this is a great point about the specific responses that will be required. A number of questions talking about liquidity move away from the government side and talk about businesses. I'm talking about working capital, deferred investments, and deferred payments, and what companies are doing and what companies should be doing in response to the crisis to preserve their own liquidity, and where they're making or actually not making investments right now.
As I said earlier, we are fortunate that many of our products are essential services. So our factories are running. It's not such a bad time for our agribusiness. Our chemical business had a difficult April and we expect a difficult May, but from June onwards, we are likely to do quite well. Our agrochemical business, Aztec Life Sciences, its stock price yesterday went up by limit up 20% because it had good results for the last financial year. It's a large-scale exporter. It gets some of its raw materials from China, competes with China, but as costs have been rising in China, as environmental protection has become stricter in China, the Indian agrochemicals business is very competitive with China. We have replaced some of our Chinese raw materials with Indian-made raw materials, and we see a very bright future for the Indian chemical industry. So in these kinds of businesses, we are investing as far as we can. Some investments have slowed down because the equipment we have ordered has been delayed, etc. But in many of our businesses, we are not cutting investment. We are investing more. And as of now, we do not have a liquidity crisis in many of our businesses. Now, businesses like hotels, airlines, and other sectors very, very badly affected by this will have to have entirely different strategies. They will have to survive. They will have to cut expenditure, even have salary cuts, whatever it takes to survive. But, and it may take a long time for them to come back. I think we've all learned how to work from home, and travel will be much less in the future. Because, we've seen the environmental benefits of COVID, and hopefully we can restructure our economies to have those environmental benefits for the entire future. Maybe this is a great opportunity to tackle climate change. And of course, it's also a great opportunity for the government to reform the economy so that the post-COVID phase will be much more efficient.
A number of people in the comments and the questions have been saying how companies, large and small, are preserving capital, withholding investments, or not proceeding with payments they have made because of the uncertainty that is in front of them. What can happen to help? Because, you know, every payment a company doesn't make is a revenue that another company doesn't receive, is a salary that somebody doesn't get to go out and spend money, even if they could. And what can happen, because this is a serious challenge for India, especially with this very large informal economy.
If businesses can within themselves come to agreements on this, they can help each other. So certainly if you have a crucial supplier, you should work closely with them to make sure that you solve their financial problems, because you are dependent on them and they are dependent on you.
I will ask Berra, because a number of people picked up the comments on privacy and talk about, you talked about on the entire cards that were shut down by the Supreme Court, the concerns about privacy and what's going on. What do you see as the key issues there as the government is stepping in on a number of dimensions of our privacy in the personal identities?
Yeah, I think that is a real concern, and I guess in a little bit it's like the lives versus livelihood debate. That in a situation like this, how do you balance these two between privacy and the health of the entire community? So the worry is that all this in most countries then resides with the government, centralized, and they claim that it's all anonymous and that they are not taking anything but what they require for COVID. But the credibility of most governments belies this. And I think, we make a big deal about surveillance in some countries like China, Russia, etc. But maybe I'm naive, but I believe it's now almost all countries. So I think privacy will certainly take a big hit post this, and the government will have much more information on each of us than we would like. But that's the ground reality.
This whole work from home and companies saying, we're going to get into 20% work from home or 25 or 30 or 50 work from home. While we are moving into a world which is much more digital, and there's no question about that, I would just pull back a little bit. Working is a lot about teamwork, collaboration. It's about human interaction. People are a social animal. It's about fun at work. I just do not think that we should be sacrificing our lives by saying, I'm going to live my life on a work from home basis. It cannot be good for life, even while it may be saving some real estate and putting the BCPs for companies when such crisis happens. Please, there's a lot of fun in going out there, meeting your friends, going to restaurants, going to work. So while it should be balanced and great if your workplace is close to your house, but you have to be with the society, you have to be with people, there has to be human interactions. And at least for APAC Financial Services, I'm saying work from home should be a contingency. Maybe it should be 5%, 10%, but it cannot be the way forward in terms of how I would encourage young people to live their lives. The second point I will make is just a headline from an author called Robin Sharma, who said, who will cry when I die? And I just think each one of us just help one more human being along here, right? It doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be what makes the social media. Help one human being, each of us here. And I think that'll go a long way. And finally, to the young students and professionals, hey, there's a crisis. You're in the middle of it. You're graduating. You've got student loans, everything. Stay optimistic. Stay confident. This too shall pass. And there's the next 30, 40 years of life where you can contribute a lot. So stay confident, stay positive. Here's my simple message to the young students. And this is a chapter which hopefully, for the bad reasons, we will forget, but it'll certainly do some good stuff into how businesses are conducted going forward.
What should be the government strategy in the agriculture sector in order to revive the industry and the ecosystem?
The government is also seeing this as an opportunity to make reforms. Farmers do not have direct contact with customers. The government had electronic platform for farmers to market their produce. There are a lot of startups to help farmers, robotics for farmers, Internet of Things for farmers, and taking produce from farmers and supplying inputs to farmers. All this will get a big push because of this. The government has also done other innovative things, such as using NREGA to help farmers harvest their produce when migrant workers went away. So all these kinds of things are going to help the agricultural sector. The agricultural sector is crucial to feed the entire country, and the government is aware of that, and the government is actually doing a lot to support this sector. And that is why agribusinesses are also doing quite well right now, because this is a critical sector and there is a lot of support. The only thing more that needs to be done is to have long-term reforms.
So I think that, Nadir just mentioned it, and I am also cautiously optimistic on this, because, for example, one of the areas that has benefited and got a tailwind from COVID is, of course, health tech. So this was stuck for, I think, a year and a half, because they needed a change of law. And then within a week of COVID, this change was made, and today there is no choice. The only way you can have most of your health checks done is by distance, and therefore that law came into being. So just similarly, I am hopeful, and I already see, especially in the startup world, that besides EdTech, because again, the whole world is on distance learning, and medical tech, there is agri-tech. And the the huge problem India has, which Nadir was saying, no direct access from farmer to the buyer because of some archaic laws, what we call the APMCs. So I think that this may get dismantled much faster than it would have done in without a crisis. So that's the hope. And then, of course, we have very, very fragmented land holdings. We don't have any corporates in agriculture. I'm sure Nadir has a good guess on which corporate will probably be the largest to jump into the agriculture fray. So these changes will happen, because even though it now is a small percentage of our GDP, I think it's 15-16%, it still employs almost 40% of our people. So obviously the productivity is not good at all. So there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm hopeful that agriculture will definitely benefit from this unfortunate situation.
If we see this disruption as an opportunity, what are the 3 top things that India has to do to take advantage of it?
The 3 for me will be: 1, I think redefine India's global relationship. I think a time has come for India to be sitting with a seat right at the head table as a part of the G5, not necessarily the G20 alone. And I think this should be a moment to redefine global relationships. And that's why I think the Prime Minister has led that one from the front and really done, in my view, exceedingly well in that. The second thing is that let's have these structural reforms rather than only consumption reforms, because capital allocation, you have to decide which way does it go. Does it go to large corporate? Does it go to small corporates? Does it go to low income group? Does it go to high income group? Wherever. So I just think a great opportunity to do structural reforms, and most importantly, those structural reforms which are going to be in the social infrastructure space, right? Healthcare, agri, right? The education. I think those are absolutely critical. And finally, I think that if there was a third thing I would say is that we should not forget the fact that destruction of jobs can cause huge social tensions and backlash.
Ganit's internet account, but it's a good time to go to Nadir. Nadir, what are the 3 things that India should do?
In my poem, I mentioned climate change and inequality. And inequality is mainly, as Gunit said, a factor of education and health. India needs to spend much more on education and health. We have seen how inequality affects the effects of COVID. Poorer people are affected much more than the well-off all over the world. And the way to tackle inequality is to spend much more on education and health. it looks like it's very difficult for the government to spend more on these things. But if we don't solve these problems, our economy will actually not grow very fast. But if we do solve these problems, our economy will grow fast and we will be able to afford these expenditures. And the other big thing is climate change. Climate change seems totally unrelated to COVID, but we have seen that the lockdowns have been of huge benefit to the environment, but devastating to the economy. Now, one might think that it's an either or. Either we have development or we prevent climate change. But that's not true. With a very reasonable carbon price, we can actually avoid climate change. And it's not a very high carbon price. In India, we already have indirect carbon prices. And the government has taken COVID's opportunity of the collapsing oil price to raise taxes on diesel and petrol. Many people are critical of this, but I actually think that it is a good kind of carbon price to have if you want to promote electric cars, if you want to promote work from home. We need these kinds of taxes, and this is a golden opportunity to solve climate change.
His first point, that this whole thing on inequality, that if there is a redistribution of wealth, that would be a very good thing. And as Gunit says, I hope some things people remember, like, there's this total skew towards capital rather than labor. So just like today, we realize that all those working in the grocery store, all the health workers, all the people in the logistics at the ports, today they are very valued. I hope that value remains and people realize that there's a lot of value to labor. And of course, as a country, we focus much more on health and education, which even comparatively, the spend as a percentage of GDP is tiny. Second, again, the environment, we've all seen that's been a big silver lining. And I just reinforce that. I think as a country, as a world, I hope we realize that we get a sensible balance there. And it is certainly achievable. And then coming to India itself, and as you said, three things, on a kind of slightly lighter note, but it's very crucial points once you get into the detail, is we keep saying that there will be new supply chains and the crisis will give India a fantastic opportunity. And of course, Nader will be at the forefront of this, being in manufacturing. But the truth is, the three things for that is land, labor, and capital. So we need to focus on the basics and see, is our land laws really globally competitive? Is our capital cost globally competitive? And is our labor productive? And cost-wise, certainly it is. But again, the higher fire policies, the productiveness. So this would be a time to really make those difficult changes. And then, yes, instead of Vietnam, Thailand, and other places everyone is going to, because yes, there will certainly be new supply chains. A lot of them will get onshore. But for India, this is a great opportunity.
For those of you that don't know Raghu, Raghu is a professor of finance, has been a professor of finance for many years, but also was a banker too, so we can, wrap things back up to where we started. He was actually the president of ING Bank in Bangalore for a number of years. But the way he connected to our school is because Raghu was the CEO of the GMR Foundation. And under his leadership, the foundation did spectacular work in education, in health, and in social services. What people may not know necessarily is that Raghu is a prolific author. He has 12 books to his name, plus about 500 articles. He has a column in the Economic Times. And last and most, a probably interesting thing about Raghu is that he has the largest collection of locks. The mundane things that we use to lock our bikes and all sorts of other things, have a very long and illustrious history in India around the world. And Raghu has logs that go back hundreds of years. Very importantly, Raghu guides the Schulich School of Business in India, and Raghu interacts with a number of our constituencies and a number of our stakeholders, and Raghu will put some thoughts together of what we heard today and what we heard in our webinar on Tuesday. Raghu?
Thank you, Theo. Generous as always. There's very little time, but that's probably just right, because after what Guneet, Nadir, and Berra have been through so comprehensively, it really leaves very little to be said. Practically every broad aspect has been covered. In fact, towards the end, Nadir even spoke of the inequality and the carbon footprints. In fact, I was looking at The Guardian this morning. One of the articles says, promiscuous treatment of nature will lead to more pandemics. I think this is exactly what Nadir was trying to hint at. You may or may not see a direct linkage, but I think it's time for us to ponder over these issues, why our indifferent, completely greedy use of nature could have created problems which were avoidable. Another article which had a very interesting title, which talks about inequality, though in a different context, is after coronavirus, black and brown people must be at the head of Britain's story. You could read it as Hindus and Muslims and Christians must be at the heart of Indian story. You could talk about inequality in different contexts, that there are different kinds of we's and they's, and how this is the time to reflect that we need to concentrate more on the similarities than on dissimilarities. So this is a time of that introspection, which has been brought out very well by all three of them. If we were to come down just to, in fact, Abhijit Banerjee and Duflo Esther today have a very interesting article again in Guardian, which says probably, and many countries I believe are already looking at this possibility of a minimum kind of a salary package for every citizen in the nation. And then you earn over and above it, which will protect you towards this anxiety of the pandemics and so on. Now, coming from somebody like Abhijit Banerjee, that's a thought that we need to take seriously and probably reflect upon. It could take different ways and different, the bullet cannot be the same for India and the US, for instance, but these are thoughts whose time have come. On the Indian context, I have also been saying the same thing, which has already been said. Our debt levels are much lower than most other countries. Between 70 and 80% debt of the GDP is much lower than 180 and 190% in USA, Italy, and so on. Now, Indian debt markets have never come of age. One reason was we never had liquid debt market. Now, how do we make it more liquid? Is it time to float 30-year and 50-year and 100-year bonds? Perhaps, yes, because we will need to invest very, very heavily in infrastructure in the times to come, as much to avoid recession as to invest in the much needed infrastructure in a country like India. I think Behram or Guneet had talked about a whole lot of assets which the RBI has as collateral possibilities. But one thing that has been left out is literally hundreds of thousands of crores in the Indian temples, the trusts of which are governed by the government of India. Tirupati alone probably has reserves of gold, silver, and cash upwards of 100,000 crore. Now, if that's the case, then probably that's a sitting, useless, non-earning asset over there, which could probably, be brought under the canvas of RBI, especially if the trusts are run by the government, to look at whether that can be securitized or encashed in some ways. One could go on. In fact, there are points that I may disagree with also, like someone said, I think it was Nadir who said taxes on petroleum prices are welcome. I would say that when the prices internationally were $130 to a barrel, and today when it is less than $20 a barrel, Indian retail prices are between 65 and 75 rupees continuously, even though on paper the Indian petrol prices are supposed to be linked to the market. So I would imagine that enormous tax has already been levied on petroleum without the man being, further burdened on it to a point where we think the government is usurious or probably almost robbing us of what is legitimately ours. The Indian common man has sacrificed enormously during these COVID times. He has stoically agreed to loss of jobs, loss of salaries, inconveniences, lost, travel problems, the immigrants problems, you name it. Restaurants are supposed to be paying to the salaries to their workers and rentals with zero revenue. So people have suffered a lot. And I think it's also the time for reflection on our corruption, which is what actually keeps our coffers empty. Are there things we can do differently? Is it time for every ministry to rethink what we do and how we do? Is it time to think of electoral reforms? I think these are, because all of us are doing housekeeping at home. My cupboards have never been cleaner. I think government also should really look at its cupboards being cleaner than what it has been. And I think it's all come out very well. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you, Raghu. Great summary and additional points brought up. Most importantly, I would like to thank Gunit Chadha. I would like to thank Nadir Godrich, and of course, I would like to thank Berra Vakil for sharing their insights, for sharing a lot of ideas, very timely ideas, very concrete ideas about the crisis, about both what the government and what businesses should be doing to respond to the crisis, turn around things, come out of the crisis better and stronger. Thank you very much, everybody.